That stigma comes from the poor farms and the homes. So in 1988, Country View Haven goes through a name change, and it starts to become an institution for the elderly. And they start to focus on elderly care. So at that time also, Henry County begins to work with Toledo to where people who have very severe mental health issues, they're not going to be kept in those facilities anymore. I'm very honored to have tonight the official person in the audience who actually came up with the name Country View Haven and got it approved and got it selected. They're here tonight. So when Country View Haven changes, this is when they begin to switch towards that inpatient care for the elderly. So why did Country View Haven end up not being used anymore by Henry County? Eventually what happens is we have Medicaid and Medicare which develops. And Medicaid and Medicare is a system for people to have some subsidy or payment that assists them in paying for their care. With the county poor farm system, Henry County commissioners were getting tax money from the citizens living in the county to help pay for those elderly patients. The problem was, from the commissioner's perspective, and believe me, I'm not here as an advocate for the commissioners, so don't kill me. Don't meet me in the parking lot tonight. The original agreement for why Henry County residents were paying those taxes is because they wanted to provide a place for the poor and the indigent. Basically what Henry County taxpayers were saying historically was, we will pay the money for you to get these people out of our community and kind of make them disappear, and I'm cool with that. Well, what happened is, as the United States government and the federal government changed the regulations on poor farms in these places, Henry County persisted, and they kept using it, and they kept using it, and kept using it, until eventually taxpayers were paying for elderly care. And that's when the commissioner stepped in and said, the mission of Country View Haven has changed. It's not the same thing anymore. If it is, then these elderly people need to get out and they need to go work the fields. Which my great-grandmother was out there. There ain't no way she's getting out in that field when she was a patient there. So as this shift continued to take place, other care facilities in the United States began to open up. And that's what we've even seen in Henry County. Other care facilities became more popular. This also pulled patients away from Country View Haven. Because even though it had a name change, it still had a little bit of that stigma, the home. So people were going to newer care facilities. Until eventually, and I'm not going to get too much into it because I know it's a tumultuous issue, eventually the commissioners voted to close Country View Haven. So with that, Country View Haven is a very unique place, and the reason I wanted to speak on this tonight is because aside from these books here, the legacies of these people are largely unknown. These people were mothers, they were daughters, they were sons, they were fathers, and because of a lack of mental health issue and treatment for people, the United States didn't know how to handle them, and we put them away. One thing that I find really interesting today is that if you go to downtown Napoleon, there's a little shop across from the Country Gourmet, a coffee shop downtown, and it's the Soaring Arts Studio. And I hope if you don't know what I'm talking about, you'll go to the Soaring Arts Studio and see what they're doing. And what it is it's an art studio that is using people, patients and people from the filling home. And they are people that have a variety of different disabilities, and they're creating art and they're selling it to the public. What I would point out to people is that when we look at Country View Haven and we think it's really sad that they're tearing it down and it's terrible, is that at one time the people who were at the Soaring Arts Studio, they would have been at the poor farm. They would have been picked up, they would have been dropped off out there, and then they would have been buried in the cemetery without a marker. And now today, they have a place in society where they're participating. And their art's actually pretty cool, by the way. Like, I like art, but their art's like really cool. And they have a place. And Country View Haven, the poor farm, at one time was their place. And through mental health and understanding, medical field advancements, we know now that that place probably isn't the most useful. So sometimes when we look back on the history of Country View Haven, what I want to point out to people is in our generation here, all of us here, we hold great memories with this place because our grandmothers died there, our grandfather died there, we would go out and visit them. And Country View Haven was a very nice place. To the names that you don't know that are in this book, Country View Haven would have been hell on earth. It would have been a terrible place. I'm sure that they are probably cheering out in the cemetery as the place is going to be torn down. Meanwhile, we hold it in our place in a very endearing manner and a little bit of a difference. So, a little bit about the items that I have here. Aside from the original log, I also have the original blueprint and layout for the first infirmed patients out there. They did a layout, a little bit of the building. They have the main entrance marked. You can come up and look at this when we're done this evening. And they have each room with the notation of the patient number and the name of the person that's there. Outside of that, I have their journals, their ledgers, and then I have their cash book as well that we can thumb through the blue books. Not the book. If anything looks like it's like handwritten and old original ink from the 1800s, let's not touch that. But all these ledger books can be looked through. I will flip through the patient book for you as well. Another thing that's kind of interesting is I have some of the original documents up here from one of the superintendents. The superintendent was really a crucial part of the poorhouse system, and then all the way through even the usage of Country View Haven itself. And a superintendent oversaw all the care and the structure of what was going on at the location. Superintendent for Country View Haven would be very similar for a superintendent of a school district. And this is why they were held in such a high accountable position. When it came out that a patient had been thrown down the stairs or broken their legs, the superintendent was held responsible for that. And that's why Henry County had 3 of them fired. Not because they threw patients down the stairs. But 2 of them were fired for the drunkenness. My favorite superintendent from Henry County's Poor Farm was the first one. He operated there and he worked there for 10 years. And he actually lived in the home diagonally across. It is now the residence of the Hoover family. It's an old farmhouse. And his name was Samuel Hagg. He had actually served in the American Civil War and he had one of his arms blown off. So imagine the original Poor Farm, a place that's foreboding, where people think there's freaks and creeps walking around, and meanwhile you go out and you're like, can I see the superintendent? And he comes out the front door and he's missing an arm. I'm sure they were like, did the patients rip your arm off? And it's kind of interesting because Samuel Hagg, serving in the war, he saw a lot of terrible things, had his arm blown off, lived in the farmhouse across the street, and out of all the superintendents I've studied, he seems to be the best. He really cared about the patients in those first 10 years, and that would have been the earliest years. I have very specific documentation that he did not seem to believe in beatings. The problem was what happened when he left. When he would go home across the street, he didn't always know what was necessarily going on overnight. Another major situation is after he left after those 10 years, it was the next round of superintendents that came in, which always seems to be a reoccurring theme in history. It's always the first people who set something up that take really good care of it, and then it's kind of like the next group that comes in that it's kind of dicey sometimes, and it doesn't work out really well. Samuel Hagg, he was very active with the infirmary. When the patients were out working in the fields, he was typically out there with them. He wanted to actually work with them, which I can't imagine again because he only had one arm. He also tried to develop a system where the women and the men worked cohesively as a unit as opposed to being separate. I don't know if this was maybe some part through his military experience or what it was. What do I mean by this? Is that if men could not work in the fields, they had to work in the home. And they were not permitted to sit and watch the women work. Huh, ladies? Yeah. So if they were cooking and a man was like, my legs don't work, I can't do that, for whatever reason, he was like, cool, you're going to sit in a chair and you're going to peel potatoes. And if it was wintertime and they couldn't go out and help clear or shovel or do that kind of work, their responsibility was in the home, they had to help do laundry, heating the water. So it was kind of an interesting deal with Samuel Hagg. I don't know an incredible amount about him, but it seems like the way he ran Henry County's Poor Farm was pretty legitimate. And when you look at the records, I can't help but feel that, he's there on day one. Those records in those first 10 years are phenomenal. And the cursive writing, it looks awesome. What's my point? I think he kind of set Henry County up to keep really good records. Because when I look through the records all the way into the 50s and the 60s, everything's really well organized. It's not until more like the 2000s that things start to get a little shoddy. And I'm not placing any blame on the people that were in charge at that time, but starting at about 2000 is when they start looking at closing Country View Haven. and there's a lot of changeover happening in the healthcare system and the financing and everything else that was going on out there. Again, I'm not throwing any kind of negativity towards the people who were working there at that time period. When you do come up, a couple of these journals are nursing journals, and it's amazing that they're still around. They have the prescriptions that the people were getting in the early 1900s, and boy, the drugs they were giving people. The amount of morphine that was ordered in the early 1900s out of Country View Haven, I don't know how people were functioning. There is one individual that was getting morphine every hour. I'm not a nurse, so I don't know exactly the prescribed amount, meaning that I don't know if it's too much for someone or too little. But they were getting, every hour they were getting morphine, and I haven't been able to pin down why. When you look through those journal books, the amount of tobacco they're also purchasing starting in the early 1900s is quite interesting. It was apparently soothing the patients, as they noted. So they would have fresh tobacco brought out every 2 weeks. Eventually, by 1905, they just put an entire plot of the field, it's all tobacco. So the county infirmary had its own tobacco field, and I'm sure the guys loved it. I've gone through a lot of information tonight, a lot of dates, a lot of mental health issues, psychology, and at this time, I don't want to bore you. I do want to open up the floor for any specific questions you might have about mental health care in the 18 or early 1900s, the treatment of people. And if you do have more specific questions about Country View Haven and disclosure and those dates and everything, I do know that as well. That's been 45 minutes already. Yes?
When you're talking about the children that were they from the people that were there? Because we have men, you have women, mental health or not, it happens.
It does.
Were they their children, or were they orphan children, or from the pregnant girls that were brought up?
Sure. The ledger says, and the one female in particular, that she arrived pregnant. That was her diagnosis for admittance into the Henry County's infirmary. So she was pregnant upon arrival. The other baby or birth, I don't know where that comes from. It lists the baby's name, infant, born on infirmary. It says born on infirmary grounds. So I don't know if the girl was outside. They're like, go out and hang up the laundry, and then she went into labor. I will say through research, they kept the men and women on a pretty tight leash, period, in all infirmaries throughout the state of Ohio. And that's why they had separate wings. What we find more common when it came to fraternizing between people was men and men, women and women. Okay. Because they couldn't get to each other. Once night came, they were pretty much locked into their wing.
Well, I was just wondering, you said they were sending the children to Toledo, the orphan thing, but I was just wondering where if there was just two, that wouldn't be a big deal, but if there was 200, that would be something.
Well, and I need to acknowledge that the one baby that is born there is there for about a week, and then they ship it to Toledo. So, again, when we think about mental health and treating people, I don't know if that female who had that child, all of their mental faculties were there, but imagine being a mother who's already at the infirmary, you birth your child, and within 1 week they're saying, we need the baby. Where's it going? That's none of your business. And that's typically how things were handled during that time period. They wouldn't have told the person it's going to the Toledo orphanage. We're taking care of it. Nothing for you to worry about. Ma'am, yes?
What kind of control did they have over the male workers with the women in one area of the facility? You know, how do they keep the male guards, let's call them guards,
Okay.
from intervening with the females?
So males who were working guards, you were saying,
Yes.
the actual caretakers or workers intervening with female patients?
Yes.
They did not.
It never happened.
So, well, I guess when you said intervening, I envisioned how they cared for them. There were female patients that were beat by males to restrain them.
And
How do we know that females were not taken advantage of?
Right.
They were. Not always, not all of them. Henry County, I have no examples of that. So I do not want everyone leaving here tonight going, oh my gosh, we all need to go tear down Country View Haven tonight.
It's not the building's fault.
And it is not the building's fault, and it's also not history's fault. People are people and do as they do. And in a time period where we don't know much about mental health, the treatment of people is pretty terrible. There were a lot of cases of men abusing female patients. Predominantly, we see it with doctors when it was time for females to have their examinations. This is a terrible talk tonight, now that I think about it. Who asked me to talk on this? Yes, ma'am.
I just wondered about the gal who had the baby, then does she go back to society? And if somebody's depressed and they get over it, do they go back to society? Can you get out of the home once you're in it?
Can you get out once you're in? It's pretty darn difficult, but in Henry County, there were a lot of examples of it. I'm not totally sure why, but usually what we found is that if the behavior modified or changed, they were released. Sometimes that release will happen if money is tight. Oh, look at that, everybody got better. Oh, look at that, they're also short on money that year. But what we find is that with the young lady who, she was admitted in when she was 17. She gets out when she dies there and is buried on the infirmary grounds. That was for most of the patients across the board in all counties in the state of Ohio. It's really tragic to say that was their escape from the poorhouse system, was unfortunately passing. So, yes?
The burial ground mark, so you can tell where the burial ground was?
Yeah, so again, there's about 89 stones in the cemetery today. Most people fly past it on County Road 15 quick as they can and probably assume that it's a family cemetery. Stones are all very modest, just small little stones. And that is actually still listed on the maps today. It's still listed as the Henry County Infirmary Cemetery. And those are all the patients. And there's a gentleman there from England, and there's another gentleman there. He served in World War I. And there's one gentleman there. His father was in the American Civil War and died, which probably lends me to believe why he wound up in the infirmary. And a couple of the women out there, they are in there, their husbands passed, and they are listed as being insane. What we probably know to be true now is they probably were suffering from depression after their husbands passed. They were probably caught crying or sobbing, and somebody said, there's something wrong with her, she needs to go back, she needs to go to the infirmary. There is one married couple buried in the infirmary cemetery, and they are buried in separate sections. As you died, they just buried your body in the row that it was, and they just continued on back and back and back to the newest section. So Adam Cook is buried up front, and then Teresa Cook is buried 2 rows back behind him, because she just died that much later. So yeah, you go out to the cemetery, and before you know it, that'll be the only history that's left in the place.
If there's only 89 graves, where is everybody else?
Oh, that's what I
I mean,
said.
seriously, because there haven't been more than 89 people out.
Oh, 1870 is when the infirmary begins, and within the first month, somebody dies.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
And then it's listed, buried on infirmary grounds.
So,
I don't know where they are. We need to have the farmers keep tilling out there, so we can locate these graves, because there's a lot. There's definitely a lot.
I mean, hundreds.
What's that?
There'd be hundreds.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there's
So, I don't know where they're at. I don't know where they're at. Ma'am?
From the employees that worked out there,
Yeah.
in the later years, close now, and the people that worked there, have you ever heard any stories of any haunting spirits?
Oh, my golly.
Places like this are always haunted.
They are always haunted. Oh, my gosh, yes.
Have you ever heard anybody say?
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure that there are workers here. Well, I mean, there's workers already here tonight that as soon as you said that are going. I have been in the building many times since its closure. And my father actually went with me. And my father is retired military personnel, like 27 years or something in the United States military, and he was like, we need to get out. We need to get out of here. I'm like, we haven't even gone on the second floor. And he's like, no, we've gone to the first room, it's enough, let's go. You don't have to believe in that, you know, it just came off Halloween, I guess, for the fun of it, but I'll tell you, they had just closed the building a few weeks prior. I was granted admittance, went in, checked it out. It was busy in there, and we were the only people in there. The elevator was just doing its thing, and I'm truthful. Oh, it was bing! And then my dad was like, it's coming back down. And I really truthfully thought, there's got to be commissioners in here, there's people in here cleaning out the building, there's got to be people in here. And all one quick hello, and nobody answered back. These places were a place of heartache for a lot of people. Again, you know, my great-grandmother passed out there. You know, loved her very much, very dearly. And you know, and I gotta say, it's sad. She was there for 3 years, and that was not the best 3 years of her life. You know, she was passing. And so, even in its newest sense, I was always happy with my grandmother's care out there. You know, when I went out there, I was always happy to see her. I didn't feel like she was getting bad care or anything. I wouldn't want to be out there. So even her, I'm sure she was like, get me out of here. And not because the care was bad, but it's the stigma and it's the home. When you went there, you passed there. Yeah, ma'am.
Once they were put into the holding cells, were they allowed out, or were they just left there to die?
No, they were not. They were not typically left there to die. Now in Henry County, I have no cases of this that I know of, but we do know throughout the state elsewhere, when these patients went into these holding cells, it's because they were essentially being what we would consider to be belligerent. They would have been pounding on their heads, they would have been having a seizure, or what have you. You throw them into a holding cell, you lock the door and walk away, and somebody's having a seizure, and they hit their head into a wall, or they are schizophrenic, and they run their head into a wall, they're going to die in those cells. Now again, Henry County, I have no documentation of that, but in other counties we do. So those holding cells would not have been a great place, to be. They're in the basement, they're in the furthest back part of the building, and it was an escape for those workers. The other thing I do, before we just totally wrap up here, I would like to say too is, I also really don't want to place a lot of blame on these workers either, because they were doing the best with what they knew at that time. I mean, to stand here and be self-righteous and say they should have known that they were schizophrenics, they didn't even have that terminology back then. So if somebody was having an epileptic seizure, we call it epilepsy. They called it epilepsy, but they thought it was a demonic possession. I can't fathom what it must have been like to work at Country New Haven, the infirmary, day in and day out, with people that you had no idea what their diagnosis was. They're screaming and wailing. And then you got to try to manage these people. We would probably all, in some regard, be pushed to our definite limits when it came to their care in the 1880s. Put them in the holding cell. I can't take it anymore. They're ripping their hair out. Okay, let's drag them downstairs. Terrible.
Who selected the people that worked out there?
It was a pretty simple process. The doctors usually went through about 7 months training in the earliest forms. Most of them were doctors that came back after the American Civil War. So in the 1870s, you had doctors who really, their greatest experience was in amputations and pulling bullets out of people. And now you drop them into a place where the patients are screaming, or they're not used to that training. So those doctors had anywhere from usually about 7 months of training in the battlefield, then their experience during the Civil War, and then they would ride off into poor farms. That was it. The nursing staff at that time period was typically women in the city, so the city of Napoleon, who had experience as midwives. That was the greatest usage of women during the time period for nursing, was go to the house, deliver a baby. Well, if you can deliver a baby, then you can go out to the poor farm and take care of patients. So again, imagine you strike someone in the face, they have no idea what that's doing inside the head. Now you've been bleeding on the brain. That wasn't even a term they knew of during that time period. So it's kind of a sad tale on both sides. and you'll probably never come back to another one of my talks again. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
At what point of time did it come to the township trustees to decide whether the patient is eligible to go to the county home, poor home?
Yeah, the poor home. You were usually recommended by somebody in the community, which is scary, because basically it is eerily reminiscent of the witch trials. Basically, all you had to have happen was your parents or somebody in the community say, hey, I think this person needs recommendation to the poor farm, and you probably were finding yourself in a wagon on the way to the poor farm. Because really the criteria was quite simple. Well, what are they doing? Well, she won't stop crying. She cries all the time. Oh, well, it sounds like insanity to me. Off they go. So there wasn't much of a guide there. Now, there was what was called the infirmary board. And these were the people, back to your original question, that if a doctor felt you were good enough or healed enough, you would go up in front of the infirmary board. I would essentially call this parole. And you would basically plead your case. And they would make the decision. Yeah, I think I'm going to be successful. We've looked through the law. It looks like you've really been helpful on the farm. We think that you'll be able to go out into society and do the same thing. So we're going to let you out. Most of the time what I find in the ledgers from Henry County residents, the only time that they really get out of the infirmary alive is when they're being transported to the Toledo the Toledo hospital, that infirmary.
I used to work with the township, and at that point, we would request that such and such a person would be eligible for it. And one of the trustees would be assigned to look into the family history to see whether or not they were poor, needed to be housing. And but before that, I remember that if somebody didn't have their full marbles, they would get transferred there.
Right. Yeah, that is correct. And one of the nurses that I was speaking with tonight, who's here, who was very active out at Country View Haven, I talked about how your generation of people here was alive during a very unique time period. You are really that generation of people that were alive when this was the biggest transitional time for these poor farms. Because it's in that like 40s and the 50s when medication started to come around, and they started to say, we've got to look greater into the psychology behind this and the treatment of these people. Thank goodness that happened when you guys were all little twinkles in your mommy and daddy's eyes, because some of you might have wound up at the poor farm. That was a huge time during that time period. And to the nurse that is here, she admitted that some of the treatments that were going on, not there but elsewhere, were still rather shocking. Electroshock therapy and some of those things. So the 50s and the 60s, I mean, I know you guys know those were hip times, but they were really hip times when it came to medication and advancements in medicine as well. So, and thank goodness for it. I want to conclude by saying I appreciate your time tonight. Part of my talk tonight, I know, it really wasn't maybe that exciting. It's very depressing history. With that, it's probably one of the most depressing talks that I have given. These people have a legacy that's all of their own, and someday we're all going to be history too. And by me coming out tonight, it is my goal when this is all said and done. I have a lot of research to do. I have 4 boxes of these books to go through. It is my goal to publish a book on Henry County's infirmary, and it will document day 1 through its closure. And with that, this is just a very small piece of what is my goal to help bring these people a little bit more dignity and respect. I want people to remember them. I want them to be remembered. They paved the way for a lot of us to receive much better health care and much better mental health treatment. And I don't want their name to just be a name in a ledger book that just narrowly escaped getting thrown in the dumpster. So I thank you for your time. I thank you for listening to this very depressing topic. And if you have any other questions, please come up and visit me. If you want more information, I'd be more than happy to help you out. Please check the Henry County Historical Society Facebook page and our website for more information. Our Christmas open house is coming up, And then also I started a YouTube channel as well. It's called Fort to Port Histories on Facebook. You can look that up as well, and it's just more of me talking about things that I love. So thank you for your time tonight. Please feel free to come on down and enjoy and take a look at these items. Thank you.